Sometimes the greatest danger comes not from your enemies, but from the moment you choose to help a stranger. There's something about seeing another human being suffer that cuts through all our careful defenses and makes us act from the heart instead of the head. Jürgen Voss lived alone in the New Mexico mountains, far from the world that had taken too much from him. When he found an old Mexican woman collapsed beside her broken wagon, starving and desperate, he couldn't just walk away. He brought her home, fed her, and cared for her like she was his own mother. For 3 quiet days, she rested in his cabin, speaking little but watching him with grateful eyes. Then the black cars came up his mountain road. Armed men stepped out, calling her Senora Valdez. That's when Jürgen learned his simple act of kindness had just made him an enemy of Mexico's most dangerous cartel family. What happens when doing right puts everything you love at risk? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The weathered compass sat on Jürgen Voss's kitchen table, its brass surface dulled by decades of use and weather. He'd carried it through 3 tours in Afghanistan, across the Hindu Kush Mountains, where the enemy knew every rock and shadow. Now, at 58, it served a different purpose, pointing him toward the simple life he'd built in these New Mexico highlands, 8,000 feet above the chaos he'd left behind. His cabin stood like a testament to patience and practicality. Hand-hewn pine logs, chinked with local clay, formed walls thick enough to keep out winter's bite and summer's heat. The metal roof, painted forest green to blend with the surrounding pines, caught rainwater in gutters that fed into storage tanks. Solar panels angled toward the southern sky, powered LED lights and a small refrigerator. Everything had been chosen for durability, for the long haul. Jürgen moved through his morning routine with the precision of a man who'd learned that structure kept the darkness at bay. Coffee first strong and black, ground from beans he ordered once a month from a supplier in Santa Fe. Then a walk around his property, checking the vegetable garden that provided most of his food, inspecting the workshop where he crafted furniture to sell in town, examining the chicken coop that housed a dozen Rhode Island Reds. The silence out here was different from the silence of war. In Afghanistan, quiet meant death might be creeping closer. Here, it meant peace. The whisper of wind through pine needles, the distant cry of a red-tailed hawk, the rustle of his boots through fallen leaves. These were the sounds of a world at rest. Maria Valdez sat in the wooden chair he'd built for the cabin's small porch, watching him tend his garden with the careful attention of someone studying a foreign language. She'd been here for 3 days now, since he'd found her collapsed beside that broken wagon on the old mining road. Dehydration, exhaustion, and something deeper, a bone-deep weariness that spoke of troubles far beyond a mechanical breakdown. She was perhaps 65, with silver-streaked hair that she kept pulled back and hands that showed a lifetime of work. Her clothes, once fine, were dusty and torn from her ordeal. But it was her eyes that told the real story, dark brown and watchful, holding secrets like a locked room holds treasures. "You don't have to work so hard," she said in accented English, her voice carrying the rhythm of Spanish underneath. "I'm not going anywhere." Jürgen straightened, brushing soil from his hands. "Work keeps a man honest. Besides, these tomatoes won't tend themselves." She smiled at that, the first real smile he'd seen from her. "My husband used to say the same thing about his roses. Maria, he would tell me, a garden is like a marriage, it only grows with daily attention." He passed 5 years ago. Cancer. She touched a small silver cross at her throat, her fingers moving over it like a prayer. He was a good man, simple, honest. Jürgen understood the weight in those words. He'd known plenty of good men who'd died too young, and plenty of others who'd lived too long for their own good. "What brings you out here alone?" Maria's smile faded. Her fingers moved to worry the hem of her blouse, a nervous habit he'd noticed whenever the conversation turned personal. Sometimes we must travel paths we never intended to walk. It was an answer that wasn't an answer, the kind of careful non-response he'd expect from someone with good reason to be cautious. He respected that. Everyone deserved their secrets, especially those who'd earned them through suffering. "Well," he said, settling into the chair beside her, "paths have a way of leading us where we need to go, even when we can't see the destination." The hand-carved wooden cross hanging above his fireplace caught the afternoon light streaming through the window. He'd made it during his first winter here, when the memories were still fresh and the nights felt endless. Whittling away at pine with his grandfather's knife, shaping something from nothing, had helped quiet the voices in his head, the voices of men who died under his command, who'd trusted him to bring them home. Maria followed his gaze. "You are a religious man?" "Spiritual, maybe." "Religious implies I've got it all figured out." He studied the cross, remembering the nights he'd spent carving it. "My grandfather was a Methodist preacher in Missouri. Used to say that faith wasn't about having answers, it was about asking the right questions." "And what questions do you ask?" Jürgen was quiet for a long moment, watching a pair of ravens dance through the air above the tree line. How to live with the choices we make, how to find peace with the things we can't change, how to know when helping someone is worth the cost. That last question hung between them like smoke from a dying fire. Maria's dark eyes studied his face, and he had the sense she was weighing something, deciding how much truth she could afford to share. Gloating, "You were a soldier," she said. It wasn't a question. "Army Ranger. 3 tours in Afghanistan, 1 in Iraq." He'd learned not to elaborate unless asked. Most people didn't really want to know what those tours had entailed. "You, a mother." The words came out soft, heavy with their own kind of weight. Sometimes that's the hardest battlefield of all. The pain in her voice was unmistakable, not just grief, but something deeper. The kind of anguish that came from loving someone you couldn't save, from watching them make choices that led them away from everything good. "Children have a way of breaking our hearts," Jürgen said, "even when they're grown. Especially when they're grown." Maria's hands clenched in her lap. "When they are small, you can protect them. You can hold them close and keep the world from hurting them. But when they become men, when they choose their own path, all you can do is pray and hope they remember what you tried to teach them." Something in her tone made Jürgen look at her more closely. There was a tremor in her voice, a crack in the careful composure she'd maintained for 3 days. Whatever had brought her to that broken wagon, whatever had left her stranded and desperate in the desert, it had to do with a child, a son. Most likely, given the way she'd said, "men." Sometimes the best thing we can do for the people we love is let them face the consequences of their choices, he said, even when it tears us apart to do it. Maria's breath caught, and for a moment he thought she might break down entirely. Instead, she stood abruptly, smoothing her skirt with hands that shook just slightly. "I should help with dinner," she said. "I am not used to being idle." Jürgen nodded, understanding the need to stay busy when the alternative was thinking too much. "Kitchen's yours, if you want it. Been cooking for myself so long I've forgotten how to make anything fancy." She disappeared inside, and he remained on the porch, watching the sun sink toward the western peaks. The mountains here were different from Afghanistan's razor-sharp ridges, older, softer, worn down by time and weather into something approaching wisdom. They'd seen their share of violence too, Apache wars, mining conflicts, border troubles that stretched back generations. But they endured, patient as stone, holding their secrets close. The sound of Maria moving around his kitchen was oddly comforting. It had been a long time since another person had shared this space, longer still, since that person had been someone he felt genuinely protective toward. She reminded him of his own grandmother, tough enough to survive whatever life threw at her, but with a gentleness that hadn't been worn away by hardship. The smell of cumin and chili powder drifted from the kitchen window, spices that weren't part of his usual repertoire. She was making something that spoke of home, of traditions passed down through generations. He found himself looking forward to dinner in a way he hadn't anticipated. When she called him in, the small table was set with plates and bowls he rarely used. She'd found candles somewhere, probably the emergency supplies he kept in the pantry, and their warm light made the cabin feel different, less like a hermit's retreat and more like a home. "Pozole," she said, ladling soup into his bowl. "My grandmother's recipe. I hope you don't mind that I use some of your hominy." The soup was rich and complex, with layers of flavor that spoke of long, slow cooking and ingredients chosen with care. It was the kind of food that nourished more than just the body. It was comfort made edible, love expressed through the simple act of feeding someone. "This is incredible," Jurgen said, and meant it. "You didn't have to go to all this trouble." "It was no trouble. Cooking for two is easier than cooking for one." She paused, her spoon halfway to her lips. "You have been very kind to me, more kind than I deserve." "Everyone deserves kindness," Jurgen said, "especially when they're carrying something heavy." Maria's eyes filled with tears. She quickly blinked away. "Some burdens are too heavy for kindness to lift." "Maybe, but that doesn't mean we stop trying." They ate in comfortable silence after that, the candles flickering between them like small prayers. Outside, the mountain night settled over the cabin with its familiar weight. Coyotes called to each other across the dark valleys, their voices wild and free. An owl hooted from the big pine beside the workshop, the sounds of a world at peace with itself. Later, as Maria cleaned the dishes despite his protests, Jurgen found himself thinking about the path that had led him here, the war that had broken something inside him. The years of drifting afterward, unable to settle anywhere that felt like home. The day he'd driven up this mountain road and known with the certainty of revelation that he'd found his place. It hadn't been easy, those first few years. The silence had been harder to bear than he'd expected. The isolation that seemed like a blessing had sometimes felt more like a curse. But gradually, he'd learned to hear the music in the quiet, to find company in the rhythms of the natural world. Now, with Maria moving quietly around his kitchen, humming some half-remembered melody under her breath, he realized how much he'd missed simple human connection. Not the surface interactions he had with shopkeepers in town or the occasional neighbor, but this, the easy intimacy of sharing a meal with someone who understood that everyone was carrying something. "I will leave tomorrow," Maria said suddenly, her back still turned to him as she dried the last bowl. "You don't have to." "Yes, I do." She set the bowl in the cupboard with careful precision. "I have already imposed on your hospitality too long." "Where will you go?" The question hung in the air like incense, heavy with implications neither of them wanted to voice. Maria turned to face him, and in the candlelight he could see the fear she'd been working so hard to hide. "I don't know," she admitted, "but I cannot stay here. It would not be safe for either of us." Those words settled into Jurgen's chest like stones, heavy and cold. He'd suspected from the beginning that Maria's situation was more complicated than a simple breakdown. The way she startled at unexpected sounds, the way her eyes constantly scanned the horizon, the careful way she avoided talking about her past, all of it pointed to someone running from something serious. "Whatever it is," he said, "we can figure it out together." Maria shook her head, tears finally spilling over. "You don't understand. The people looking for me, they are not the kind of people who show mercy to those who help their enemies. And you're not the kind of person who deserves to face that alone." The words surprised him even as he said them. 3 days ago, he'd been content with his solitude, satisfied with a life that touched no one else's story. Now he found himself ready to step into whatever darkness had driven this woman to his door. Maria studied his face in the flickering candlelight, and he had the sense she was seeing him clearly for the first time, not just the hermit who'd rescued her, but the soldier underneath, the man who'd spent years learning how to protect people who couldn't protect themselves. "You don't know what you're offering," she whispered. "Then tell me." But she only shook her head again and turned away, and Jurgen knew that whatever secrets she carried, whatever danger was following her, tomorrow would bring it all to his doorstep, whether he was ready or not. Dawn broke over the mountain peaks with the pale light of early autumn, casting long shadows through the pine trees that surrounded Jurgen's cabin. He'd been awake since before sunrise, unable to shake the feeling that something was coming. 20 years of military service had taught him to trust his instincts, and right now every instinct he had was screaming danger. Maria had barely slept either. He'd heard her moving around the guest room, pacing like a caged animal. When she finally emerged for coffee, her face was drawn and her hands trembled as she lifted the mug to her lips. "They're coming today," she said without preamble. "I can feel it." Jurgen set down his own coffee and studied her face. "Who's coming, Maria?" Before she could answer, the sound of engines echoed up the mountain road, not the usual rumble of his neighbor's pickup or the mail truck, but something deeper, more powerful. Multiple vehicles moving in formation. Maria's coffee mug slipped from her fingers, shattering against the wooden floor. "Dios mío," she whispered. "They found me." Jurgen moved to the window and peered through the gap in the curtains. 3 black SUVs were winding their way up his access road, moving with the deliberate precision of a military convoy. The lead vehicle's windows were tinted so dark they looked like mirrors, reflecting the morning sun in cold flashes. "Get to the back room," Jurgen said, his voice calm despite the adrenaline flooding his system. "Stay away from the windows." "No." Maria grabbed his arm, her fingers digging into his flesh. "You don't understand. If they find me here, they'll kill you. They'll kill anyone who helped me." "Who are they?" The first SUV pulled into his clearing, followed by the other 2. They formed a loose semicircle in front of his cabin, engines still running. Jurgen counted 6 men stepping out, all wearing expensive dark suits that looked out of place in the mountain wilderness. Each one moved with the fluid confidence of professional killers. "My son's men," Maria whispered, her voice barely audible. "Please, Jurgen, hide me. Just until they leave." But it was too late for hiding. The lead man, tall and lean with silver at his temples, was already walking toward the cabin. His hand rested casually on the butt of a pistol, holstered beneath his jacket. Behind him, the others spread out in a pattern that cut off any escape routes. A hard knock rattled the front door. "Senor Voss," came a voice with a thick accent. "We know you are inside. We wish only to talk." Jurgen looked at Maria, saw the terror in her eyes, and made his decision. He pulled his grandfather's .45 from the drawer where he kept it and tucked it into the back of his waistband, then walked to the door. "Can I help you, gentlemen?" he called through the wood. "My name is Lieutenant Ramirez. I work for Diego Valdez. We believe you have something that belongs to him." The name hit Maria like a physical blow. She staggered backward, one hand pressed to her mouth to muffle a sob. Diego Valdez. Now Jurgen understood why she'd been so terrified. Everyone in the borderlands knew that name. Diego Valdez controlled the largest drug trafficking operation between Mexico City and El Paso. His reputation for brutality was legendary, but so was his devotion to family. "If Maria was his mother, I don't have anything that belongs to anyone," Jurgen called back. "Just a quiet life. I'd like to keep that way. Please, senor, open the door. We can resolve this peacefully." Jurgen glanced back at Maria, who was shaking her head frantically. But he knew these men weren't going away, and a locked door wouldn't stop them for long. Better to face this head-on than give them an excuse for violence. He opened the door slowly, keeping his hands visible. Lieutenant Ramirez was younger than he'd sounded, maybe 40, with intelligent eyes and the bearing of someone accustomed to command. The other 5 men had positioned themselves strategically around the clearing professionals who knew their business. "Senor Voss," Ramirez nodded politely. "Thank you for your cooperation. We are looking for an elderly woman, Mexican. She would have been traveling alone, perhaps in distress." "Haven't seen anyone like that," Jurgen said. "Road doesn't get much traffic." Ramirez smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. Perhaps she sought shelter, water, food. It would be natural for someone of your reputation to help a stranger in need. The way he said reputation made it clear they'd done their homework. They knew about his military service, probably knew about the medals gathering dust in a box somewhere, definitely knew he wasn't just some harmless mountain hermit. Like I said, haven't seen anyone. From behind him came the soft sound of footsteps. Maria appeared in the doorway, her chin raised in defiance despite the fear in her eyes. "Let him be, Rafael," she said to Ramirez. "This man has done nothing wrong." Ramirez's face showed a mixture of relief and exasperation. "Senora Valdez, your son has been very worried about you." "I'm sure he has." Maria's voice was bitter. "And I'm sure his concern has nothing to do with keeping me silent about what I've seen." The temperature in the clearing seemed to drop 10 degrees. Ramirez's hand moved closer to his weapon, and the other men shifted their positions slightly. Jürgen felt the familiar hyper-awareness of combat settling over him, the way time seemed to slow, the way his senses sharpened until he could hear every rustle of leaves, every creak of leather holsters. "Senora, you know that's not true," Ramirez said carefully. "Diego loves you. You are his mother." "I was his mother," Maria replied. "The woman who raised him, who taught him right from wrong. That boy is dead. The man who took his place." She shuddered. "I don't know what he is." Jürgen found himself stepping slightly in front of Maria, a movement so instinctive he barely realized he was doing it. But Ramirez noticed, and his eyes narrowed. "Senor Voss, you seem like a reasonable man. Surely you understand this is a family matter. Give us the senora, and we will leave you in peace." "She's not property to be handed over," Jürgen said quietly. "If she wants to leave with you, that's her choice. If she wants to stay, that's also her choice." Behind him, he felt Maria's hand touch his shoulder, not clinging, but steadying herself, drawing strength from his presence. "I won't go," she said. "Not back to him, not to watch him destroy everything my husband and I built, everything we taught him to value." Ramirez sighed and pulled a cell phone from his pocket. He spoke rapidly in Spanish, too fast for Jürgen to follow, but he caught the name Diego several times. When he finished the call, his expression had hardened. "I'm sorry, senora, but that is not acceptable. Don Diego has given orders you are to be returned immediately. For your own protection, of course." "Of course," Maria said dryly. "And if she refuses?" Jürgen asked. Ramirez spread his hands in a gesture that managed to be both apologetic and threatening. "Then I'm afraid we would have to insist. Don Diego does not accept no for an answer, especially from family." "That's where you and I have a problem," Jürgen said, "because I don't take kindly to people threatening my guests." The words hung in the mountain air like smoke from a gun barrel. For a long moment, nobody moved. Then Ramirez laughed, not with humor, but with the kind of genuine surprise that comes from encountering something unexpected. "Your guests," he repeated. "Senor, I think you misunderstand the situation. Senora Valdez is not some lost tourist. She is the mother of one of the most powerful men in Mexico. She has information that could damage his operations, hurt his family. We cannot simply leave her here." "Then you have a problem," Jürgen said, "because she's not leaving unless she wants to." One of the other men, a younger guy with tattoos covering his neck, started to move forward, but Ramirez held up a hand to stop him. "Senor Voss, please be reasonable. You have already done a good deed by helping the senora when she was in distress. No one will blame you for that kindness. But now that we have found her, your responsibility ends. Let us take her home, and this matter will be forgotten." "By everyone except her," Jürgen said. Maria stepped out from behind him, facing the armed men with a courage that made Jürgen's chest tighten with admiration. "I will go with you," she said quietly, "but only to spare this good man from paying for my mistakes." "Maria, no." She turned to him, and in her eyes he saw not defeat, but a kind of fierce protection. She was willing to sacrifice herself to keep him safe, just as he'd been ready to fight to keep her free. "Thank you," she said simply. "For 3 days you gave me back what I thought I had lost forever, the feeling of being safe, of being cared for without condition. I will not forget that gift." Ramirez nodded to his men, who began to relax slightly. Crisis averted, at least for now. However, Ramirez continued, his eyes never leaving Jurgen's face, "Don Diego will want to speak with you personally. You have shown his mother great kindness, and he will want to express his gratitude in person." The word gratitude sounded like a threat wrapped in courtesy. Jurgen had heard that tone before, in briefings about enemy commanders who preferred to settle scores face to face. "Tell Don Diego I was happy to help," Jurgen said. "No thanks necessary." "I'm afraid that's not how this works," Ramirez replied. "Diego Valdez does not leave debts unpaid, good or bad. He will come to see you soon." As Maria walked toward the SUV, escorted by 2 of the men, she paused and looked back at Jurgen. In her eyes, he saw an apology and a warning in equal measure. Then she was gone, and Jurgen was alone in his clearing, watching the black vehicles disappear down the mountain road. On the ground near his front door, something glinted in the morning sunlight, a black leather glove dropped by one of Ramirez's men. He picked it up, feeling the expensive leather, noting the weight of it. This wasn't some cheap work glove, it was the kind of thing a man wore when he wanted to make an impression, when image mattered as much as function. As the sound of engines faded into the distance, Jurgen stood holding the glove and thinking about what Ramirez had said. Diego Valdez was coming, and when he arrived, Jurgen had the feeling his quiet mountain life was about to become very complicated indeed. The silence that settled over the cabin felt different now, not peaceful, but expectant, like the moment before a storm breaks, when the air itself seems to hold its breath. The faded photograph lay on Jurgen's kitchen table, its edges worn from handling over the years. 8 men in desert camouflage, their faces young and serious beneath the unforgiving Afghan sun. 3rd Platoon, Bravo Company, 75th Ranger Regiment. Brothers in arms who'd trusted him to bring them home. Most of them had made it. 3 hadn't. Jurgen studied the faces of the dead men Rodriguez, Patterson, and young Murphy, who'd only been 19. They'd died because he'd made a call in the field, chosen to trust intelligence that turned out to be wrong. The weight of that decision had followed him home from the war, had driven him to these mountains where the only person he could get killed was himself. Now, staring at their faces in the afternoon light streaming through his cabin windows, he felt the familiar knot of responsibility forming in his chest. Maria Valdez was in danger because she'd trusted him to protect her, just like his men had trusted him to make the right calls under fire. The difference was, this time, he had a choice about getting involved. His laptop, one of the few concessions to modern technology he allowed himself, sat open on the counter. It had taken 3 phone calls to old contacts, but he'd finally reached someone willing to talk about Diego Valdez. What he'd learned made his blood run cold. Diego Valdez wasn't just another cartel boss. He was a legend in the narcotics trade, known for his strategic brilliance and his complete lack of mercy toward anyone who crossed him. The DEA had been trying to build a case against him for 15 years without success. His organization moved more drugs across the border than any 3 competitors combined, and they did it with a level of sophistication that suggested military training. But it was the personal details that worried Jurgen most. Diego's father had been murdered by rivals when Diego was 16. His response had been swift and brutal. The entire bloodline of the responsible family had been eliminated within a month. Since then, family loyalty hadn't just been important to Diego Valdez, it had been sacred, which meant Maria wasn't just a potential witness to be silenced. She was a mother who'd apparently betrayed her son's trust, and in Diego's world, that was the kind of sin that demanded very personal attention. Jurgen closed the laptop and walked to his gun safe, a military-grade steel box bolted to the floor of his bedroom closet. Inside, wrapped in oiled cloth, were weapons he hadn't touched in 5 years. His old service pistol, a Sig Sauer P226 that had saved his life more times than he cared to count. A Remington 700 sniper rifle with a custom scope, body armor that still fit, though it was heavier than he remembered. He laid everything out on his bed, like a surgeon preparing instruments. Muscle memory took over as he field-stripped each weapon, cleaned and inspected every component, checked the action and the trigger pull. The familiar ritual was oddly comforting. These were tools he understood, skills that had kept him alive when nothing else would. But weapons were only part of the equation. If Diego Valdez was coming, and Ramirez had made it clear he was, then Jurgen needed to think tactically about his position. The cabin sat in a natural bowl, surrounded by pine-covered ridges, with only one road in or out. In military terms, it was a trap defensible if you saw the enemy coming, but impossible to escape if they surrounded you. He'd chosen this location specifically for its isolation, never imagining he'd need to defend it against professional killers. His phone rang, the harsh sound cutting through the mountain silence. The caller ID showed a number he recognized, Sheriff Tom Brennan, whose jurisdiction included this part of the county. "Jurgen?" Brennan's voice was tight with concern. "I just got a call from the highway patrol. They spotted 3 black SUVs with Mexican plates heading up toward your place this morning. You want to tell me what that was about?" Tom Brennan was good people, a former Marine who'd served 2 tours in Iraq before coming home to wear a badge. He and Jurgen had developed a mutual respect over the years, based partly on shared military experience and partly on Jurgen's habit of staying out of trouble. "Had some visitors," Jurgen said carefully, "looking for someone they thought I might have seen." "And did you see someone, I mean?" Jurgen was quiet for a moment, weighing his options. Tom was a straight shooter, but he was also a law enforcement officer, with obligations that might conflict with what Jurgen was planning. "Tom, if I told you I was expecting more visitors, the kind that might not have good intentions, what would you do about it?" There was a long pause on the other end of the line. "Depends on what kind of visitors we're talking about. You in some kind of trouble, Jurgen?" "Maybe. The kind of trouble that comes from doing the right thing at the wrong time." "Jesus." Tom sighed heavily. "Look, I can't put a deputy on your place permanently, not without more information. But I can increase patrols in your area, maybe position someone at the bottom of the mountain road. Would that help?" "It might just get someone killed," Jurgen said honestly. "These aren't the kind of people who get discouraged by a uniform." "Then maybe you should consider coming down to town for a while. Stay at the motel. Let whatever this is blow over." Jurgen looked around his cabin at the hand-carved furniture, the photographs on the walls, the life he'd built one careful piece at a time. This place represented everything he'd worked for since leaving the military. Peace, solitude, the chance to live without violence. But it also represented something else now. It was the place where he'd chosen to help Maria, where he'd made a stand for decency over fear. Walking away would mean abandoning everything that choice represented. "Can't do that, Tom. This is my home. God damn it, Jurgen." Tom's frustration was evident. "What aren't you telling me? Who are these people?" "The kind of people who make problems disappear," Jurgen said, "including the problems themselves." There was another long silence. Then Tom spoke again, his voice careful and professional. "If you change your mind about protective custody, call me, day or night." "And Jurgen? If shooting starts, I need to know about it immediately. I can't help you if I don't know what's happening." After Tom hung up, Jurgen stood in his cabin, listening to the silence. Outside, a pair of elk grazed in the meadow beyond his garden, their movements graceful and unhurried. Hawks circled high above the tree line, riding the thermals with patient efficiency. The natural world continued its ancient rhythms, indifferent to human conflicts. He thought about the choice ahead of him. He could pack a bag and disappear into the wilderness he knew so well. live off the land for weeks or months until Diego Valdez lost interest and moved on to other concerns. It would be the smart play, the safe play, but it would also mean abandoning Maria to whatever fate her son had planned for her. It would mean letting fear make his decisions for him, just like he'd done when he'd left the military and fled to these mountains. The photograph on the kitchen table caught his eye again. Rodriguez, Patterson, Murphy, 3 good men who died because he'd made a hard choice under impossible circumstances. He'd spent 5 years running from the guilt of their deaths, but maybe it was time to stop running. Maybe it was time to make a choice he could live with, regardless of the consequences. Jürgen picked up the phone and dialed a number from memory. It rang twice before a familiar voice answered. "Marcus Whitfield. Marcus, it's Jürgen Voss." "Jesus, Jürgen, it's been, 3 years? How are you, brother?" Marcus had been his staff sergeant in Afghanistan, a career soldier who'd stayed in the army long enough to retire, with full benefits. He was living in Colorado now, working private security for executives who needed more protection than local law enforcement could provide. "I'm good, Marcus, but I might need some advice, professional advice." The tone of Marcus's voice shifted immediately. "What kind of situation are we talking about?" Jürgen looked out his window at the peaceful mountain vista, knowing it might be the last time he saw it this way, as a sanctuary rather than a battlefield. "The kind where good intentions meet bad people," he said, "and where running might not be an option." The silver St. Christopher medal lay in Jürgen's palm, its surface worn smooth by decades of handling. He'd found it on the floor beside the guest room bed when he'd gone to change the sheets. Maria must have dropped it in her haste to pack the few belongings she'd carried in her worn canvas bag. St. Christopher, patron saint of travelers. The inscription on the back was in Spanish, "Protégeme en mis viajes," "Protect me on my journeys." The metal was warm from his touch, and he could imagine Maria's fingers worrying over it during those 3 days in his cabin, seeking comfort in faith when everything else had failed her. Now, holding this small piece of her life, Jürgen felt the weight of responsibility settle deeper into his bones. She'd trusted him with more than just her safety. She'd trusted him with her hope, and he'd watched her walk away with men who saw her as nothing more than a problem to be managed. Marcus had called back within an hour, his voice carrying the crisp authority of someone accustomed to briefing operations under pressure. The news wasn't good. "Diego Valdez isn't just dangerous," Marcus had said. "He's brilliant, West Point graduate, believe it or not. Did 2 years as an army officer before his father was killed, and he went south to take over the family business. The guy thinks like a general, plans like a chess master, and executes like a machine." What about his mother? That's where it gets interesting. Maria Valdez used to run the legitimate side of the family enterprises, restaurants, import businesses, real estate. Word is she tried to keep Diego focused on legal operations after his father died, but the money in drugs was too good to ignore. There was a falling out about 5 years ago. She's been essentially under house arrest ever since. And now she's run. Marcus agreed. Which means Diego's got a family problem that threatens everything he's built. In his world, that's not just personal, it's existential. Jürgen had spent the rest of the afternoon making preparations. Motion sensors along the access road, positioned where they'd be invisible to casual observation, but would give him advance warning of approaching vehicles. He'd tested the solar-powered system 3 times, making sure the alerts would reach the receiver in his cabin. The rifle range behind his workshop got its first use in months as he re-zeroed his Remington 700. 5 shots at 300 yards, each one touching the others in a group smaller than a silver dollar. Muscle memory and training taking over. His body remembering skills his mind had tried to forget. But it was the phone call from Agent Sarah Martinez of the DEA that had really driven home the gravity of his situation. "Mr. Voss," she'd said, her voice carrying the professional courtesy that law enforcement used when they needed something. We understand you may have had contact with Maria Valdez recently. Who told you that? Let's just say we keep an eye on people connected to Diego Valdez. Your name came up in some communications we've been monitoring, which meant they were watching him now, had probably been watching since the moment Ramirez's team left his mountain. Jurgen felt the familiar paranoia of being in hostile territory, where every shadow might hide an enemy. What do you want, Agent Martinez? To help you stay alive, she'd said bluntly. Diego Valdez has killed federal judges, rival cartel leaders, and his own lieutenants when they disappointed him. An ex-soldier who helped his mother escape won't even rate a footnote in his biography. Unless you're willing to help us. Maria Valdez has information that could bring down her son's entire operation. Financial records, names of corrupted officials, details about routes and methods. If we could get her to cooperate. She's not cooperating with anyone, Jurgen had interrupted. She's protecting her son, even if it kills her. Maybe, but people's positions change when they realize the alternative is watching everyone they care about die. The conversation had ended there, but Martinez's business card now sat on his kitchen table next to Maria's medal. 2 choices, 2 paths forward. Work with the feds and become a target for the rest of his life, or stand alone against whatever Diego Valdez had planned. As evening approached, Jurgen found himself thinking about the stories Maria had told during their quiet meals together. Diego, as a boy, brilliant and curious, always asking questions about right and wrong. Diego, as a teenager, devastated by his father's murder, but still trying to honor his mother's wish that he pursue education over revenge. Diego, as a young man, torn between duty to family and his own moral compass. He was such a gentle child, she'd said one evening, her eyes distant with memory. Always bringing home injured animals, trying to heal them. He had his father's strength, but my heart, or so I thought. What changed him? Fear, she'd said simply. Fear that if he didn't become harder than his enemies, he would lose everything. But the harder you become, the more you lose anyway. Eventually, there's nothing left but the hardness. Now, polishing the St. Christopher medal with a soft cloth, Jurgen wondered if there was anything left of that gentle boy in the man who commanded Mexico's most feared criminal organization. Maria seemed to think so. Why else would she have run, instead of simply disappearing? She was trying to save her son by removing herself from his world, forcing him to choose between his criminal empire and his love for her. It was a desperate gamble that would probably get them both killed. Jurgen's motion sensors chimed softly, indicating movement on the access road. He checked the display, single vehicle, moving slowly, stopping frequently. Either someone was being very careful, or they were lost. He grabbed his binoculars and moved to the window that gave him the best view down the mountain. A battered pickup truck was making its way up the road, pausing at each switchback. As it drew closer, he could see the driver, an elderly Hispanic man wearing a straw hat, alone in the cab. The truck pulled into his clearing and stopped. The driver sat for a moment, looking around nervously, before stepping out and walking toward the cabin. He was small and wiry, probably in his 70s, moving with the careful gait of someone whose joints had seen too many years of hard work. Jurgen met him on the porch, keeping his hands visible but ready to move if necessary. "Señor Voss?" the man asked in accented English. "That's me. My name is Vicente Morales. I worked for the Valdez family. Señora Maria, she asked me to bring you this." He pulled an envelope from his shirt pocket, yellowed with age and sealed with wax. Jurgen's name was written on the front in careful script. "She said to tell you she is sorry for bringing trouble to your door." She said, Vicente paused, struggling with the English words. "She said to tell you that kindness should not be punished, but sometimes it is anyway." Jurgen took the envelope, feeling the weight of folded papers inside. Where is she now? Safe, for the moment. But Diego? Vicente shook his head sadly. He is very angry, very hurt. When Diego is hurt, people die. And you? What happens to you when Diego finds out you came here? Vicente smiled, and Jurgen saw a lifetime of weathered wisdom in the old man's eyes. I am 76 years old, senor. I have worked for the Valdez family since Diego was born. If he kills me for helping his mother, then he is already lost beyond saving. As Vicente drove away, Jurgen stood on his porch, holding Maria's letter and the St. Christopher medal. The sun was setting behind the western peaks, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson. It was beautiful, peaceful, exactly the kind of evening that had convinced him this mountain was home. But peace was an illusion now. Diego Valdez was coming, and when he arrived, Jurgen would have to choose between the life he'd built and the man he'd sworn to be, between safety and honor, between survival and doing what was right. He looked down at the medal in his palm, then closed his fingers around it. Whatever happened next, Maria wouldn't face it alone. The gold signet ring caught the lamplight as Diego Valdez turned it slowly around his finger, a nervous habit from childhood that had survived decades of deliberate self-control. The ring bore his family's coat of arms, a Spanish colonial design dating back to when the Valdez name had meant something respectable. Before the drugs, before the violence, before his father's blood had been spilled on a Mexico City sidewalk. Now, sitting in the study of his compound 30 miles south of the border, Diego stared at photographs spread across his mahogany desk. Aerial shots of Jurgen Voss's mountain property, taken by his surveillance team with telephoto lenses. The cabin looked peaceful, almost quaint, surrounded by pine trees and vegetable gardens. It was hard to believe this quiet place had become the center of his most personal crisis. "The man is a problem," said Carlos Mendoza, Diego's head of security. Carlos was built like a bulldozer, with scarred hands and cold eyes that had seen too much violence. "We should have eliminated him when Ramirez first made contact." "My mother was there," Diego replied, his voice carefully controlled. "She has suffered enough. With respect, Jefe, she chose to run. She chose to involve this American soldier. The consequences are mine to decide." Diego's tone carried the quiet authority that had built his empire. Men who crossed that tone didn't live long enough to regret it. Carlos nodded and stepped back, but Diego could see the frustration in his lieutenant's face. In Carlos's world, problems were solved with bullets and bodies left as warnings. It was an effective approach, but crude. Diego had built something more sophisticated than a simple criminal enterprise. He'd created a business empire that happened to traffic in illegal goods. But this situation with his mother threatened everything he'd built. Maria Valdez wasn't just family. She was the moral center around which his entire organization revolved. His men followed him partly out of fear, but mostly out of respect for the values she had instilled in him: loyalty, honor, protection of the innocent. If word spread that his own mother had fled from him, had chosen the protection of a stranger over her own son's care, his authority would crumble. Rivals would see weakness. His own lieutenants would begin to question his leadership. The empire he'd spent 20 years building would collapse within months. "What do we know about this, Voss?" Diego asked. Carlos consulted a tablet, scrolling through intelligence reports. Former Army Ranger, 3 tours in Afghanistan, decorated veteran Purple Heart, Bronze Star, Silver Star for gallantry in action. Left the military 5 years ago after a mission went bad. Lost 3 men under his command. Family? Parents dead, no siblings, never married, no apparent vulnerabilities we can exploit. Carlos paused. But there's something else. We have confirmation he's been in contact with federal agents. Diego looked up sharply. DEA? Agent Sarah Martinez called him yesterday. 40-minute conversation. We couldn't intercept the content, but the timing suggests they're trying to recruit him. This changed everything. If the Americans were involved, if they saw an opportunity to use his mother against him, then Diego's problems had just become exponentially more complex. The DEA had been trying to build a case against him for years without success. His lawyers were too good, his security too tight, his operations too careful. But if Maria decided to cooperate with them, sir? Carlos was watching him carefully. Your orders? Diego stood and walked to the window that overlooked his estate. 20,000 acres of legitimate ranch land, with cattle and horses and farm workers who had no idea what their boss really did for a living. It was the life his mother had wanted for him, peaceful, respectable, free from the violence that had claimed his father. But respect bought with weakness was no respect at all. His father had learned that lesson too late, gunned down by rivals who saw compassion as vulnerability. Diego had sworn over his father's grave that he would never make the same mistake. Increase surveillance on the American, he said finally. I want to know everything: what he eats, when he sleeps, who he talks to, but no direct action. Not yet. And if he runs, he won't run. Diego turned back to face his lieutenant. Men like Voss don't run from fights. They run toward them. After Carlos left, Diego remained alone in his study, surrounded by the photographs and reports that detailed his mother's unlikely sanctuary. The irony wasn't lost on him. She'd fled from the protection of one soldier to seek refuge with another. As if all the power he'd accumulated, all the fear his name inspired, meant nothing compared to the simple decency of a man who asked for nothing in return. His phone buzzed. A text message from a number he didn't recognize, but the content made his blood run cold. Your mother is safe. She asks that you remember the boy you used to be. A friend. Diego stared at the message for a long moment, then deleted it, but the words lingered in his mind like smoke from a fire that wouldn't die. The boy he used to be before the violence, before the empire, before he'd learned that love without power was just another word for victim. That boy had believed in heroes and justice and the possibility that good could triumph over evil. That boy had cried when his pet dog died, had brought home injured birds to nurse back to health, had promised his mother he would always be her gentle son. That boy was dead, had to be dead. The man Diego had become couldn't afford such sentimentality. But as he looked at the photographs of Jürgen Voss's mountain refuge, Diego found himself wondering if his mother saw something in that place that he'd forgotten how to see. Something worth risking everything to protect. 3 hours later, Jürgen's motion sensors detected another vehicle on the mountain road. This time it was a sleek black sedan, moving with purpose up the winding asphalt. Jürgen watched through his binoculars as it stopped just short of his clearing, and 2 men in expensive suits stepped out. They weren't here to talk. The first man carried a briefcase and moved like corporate security professional, but not military. The second was different, older, with silver hair and the bearing of someone accustomed to command. He surveyed Jürgen's property with the calculated gaze of a tactician assessing terrain. Jürgen's tactical radio crackled to life. Sheriff Brennan's voice came through the speaker, tense with urgency. Jürgen, you've got company coming up the mountain. We've been monitoring radio chatter. These aren't the same guys from before. This feels different. How different? Like a job interview or a final exam. The 2 men began, walking toward his cabin, their movements deliberate and unhurried. The older man's hand rested casually at his side, near what was probably a concealed weapon, but his posture suggested negotiation rather than violence, at least for now. Jürgen checked the load on his, 45, and stepped onto his porch to meet them halfway. The afternoon sun was warm on his face, and birds sang in the pine trees as if this were just another peaceful day in paradise. Gentlemen, he called, when they were close enough to hear. You're a long way from anywhere. The older man smiled, and Jürgen saw intelligence in his eyes, along with something else, respect, maybe, or curiosity. Mr. Voss, my name is Miguel Santos. I represent certain interests in Mexico who have been following your situation with great attention. What kind of interests? The kind that value honor and family above profit, the kind that believe some lines should not be crossed, even in our business. Santos gestured toward the mountains surrounding them. Beautiful country. Peaceful. A man could find himself here if he were looking. I've already found myself. Thanks, Santos laughed, a sound without humor. Have you? Because from where I sit, you look like a man who's about to lose everything he's worked to build. Diego Valdez is not known for his restraint when family honor is at stake. Then maybe you should be talking to him instead of me. Oh, we will be, Santos replied. But first, we thought you should know what you're really dealing with, and what alternatives might be available to a man of your reputation. The briefcase clicked open, and Santos withdrew a thick folder. Photographs, documents, financial records, all bearing Diego Valdez's name or image. Your new friend isn't just a drug dealer, Mr. Voss. He's a businessman who understands that markets require stability. Competition requires boundaries. Some of us have begun to question whether his recent emotional instability might be affecting his judgment. Jürgen studied the documents without touching them. Bank records showing millions in transfers. Photographs of Diego meeting with government officials. Lists of competitors who had died under mysterious circumstances. You're offering to take him out, Jürgen said. And you want me to help. We're offering to solve a problem that threatens everyone's interests, Santos corrected. Including your own survival. In exchange for what? Diego's mother, alive and unharmed, a peaceful resolution to your current difficulties, and perhaps a role in ensuring that future operations in this region proceed with proper consideration for innocent parties. It was a devil's bargain, wrapped in reasonable language. Help Diego's enemies destroy him and live to see another day. Refuse and face whatever wrath the cartel boss had planned. Jürgen looked past Santos toward the mountains where Maria was hiding, probably praying for a miracle that would save both her son and the stranger who'd shown her kindness. I'll need time to think about it, he said finally. Santos nodded and closed the briefcase. Of course, but don't take too long, Mr. Voss. Diego is already on his way north, and when he arrives, thinking, time will be over. The tactical radio crackled with static as Jürgen adjusted the frequency, its military-grade components cutting through the mountain interference like a knife through fog. He'd retrieved it from his emergency supplies after Santos left, knowing that communication would be critical in the hours ahead. The device represented more than just technology. It was his lifeline to the world beyond his mountain sanctuary, his connection to allies who might help him survive what was coming. Marcus Whitfield's voice came through clearly from his position in Colorado. I've got 3 men who can be at your location within 6 hours, he said. All former special forces, all reliable. Say the word, and we're moving. Jürgen stood at his kitchen window, watching the sun sink toward the western peaks. In the fading light, his property looked peaceful, almost pastoral. Hard to believe it would soon become a battlefield. Negative on the backup, he said into the radio. This isn't a military operation, Marcus. It's personal. Personal operations get people killed, brother. You taught me that in Kandahar. The memory hit Jürgen like a physical blow. Operation Red Dawn, 2019. They'd been tasked with extracting a kidnapped aid worker from a Taliban compound. Simple mission, clean objectives. But Jürgen had let personal feelings cloud his judgment. The aid worker reminded him of his sister, dead since childhood cancer. He'd taken unnecessary risks, ignored protocol, and 3 good men had paid the price. This is different, Jürgen said, though he wasn't entirely sure he believed it. Is it? You're emotionally invested in protecting someone you barely know, facing an enemy with superior numbers and resources, and you're planning to do it alone. Sounds familiar to me. Before Jürgen could respond, his motion sensors chimed. 2 vehicles this time, moving fast up the mountain road. Through his binoculars, he could see they weren't the black SUVs from before. These were modified pickup trucks with reinforced frames and tinted windows. Scout vehicles? Probably. Testing his defenses and escape routes. Marcus, I've got company. Going dark for now, Jurgen. He switched off the radio and moved to his prepared position behind the thick log walls of his workshop. From here, he had clear sight lines to the access road and multiple fallback positions if the situation deteriorated. The Remington 700 lay across a sandbag rest, its scope zeroed for the distances he'd measured around his property. The truck stopped at the edge of his clearing but didn't advance. Through the scope, Jurgen could see armed men inside, watching his cabin with the patient stillness of professional hunters. They were probing, gathering intelligence about his capabilities and defensive positions. His landline phone rang, the sound harsh in the mountain silence. Jurgen considered ignoring it, but something made him move to answer. Senor Voss. The voice was cultured, speaking English with only a slight accent. My name is Diego Valdez. Jurgen felt his grip tighten on the receiver. After all the preparation, all the build-up, hearing that voice made everything suddenly real. This wasn't just about Maria anymore, it was about two men whose codes of honor had put them on a collision course. I know who you are, Jurgen said. Good, then you know why I'm calling. My mother is a stubborn woman, but she is still my mother. I cannot allow her to remain in danger. She's not in danger from me. No, Diego agreed. But she is in danger because of you. My enemies see her as a weapon to be used against me. Federal agents see her as an opportunity to destroy my Tupadu organization. As long as she remains free, she remains a target. Through his scope, Jurgen watched the men in the trucks. They were disciplined, professional, not the kind of street soldiers most cartels employed. These were Diego's elite, probably former military, like their boss. So what do you want? Jurgen asked. To meet, to discuss this situation like civilized men. You have something I need, and perhaps I have something you need as well. Such as your life, Diego said simply, and the lives of anyone who might try to help you. It wasn't a threat delivered with heat or anger, just a statement of fact, which somehow made it more chilling. Jurgen had heard that tone before, from enemy commanders who killed without passion or personal investment. Pure calculation. Where? Jurgen asked. There is an old mining camp 5 miles north of your property. Abandoned for decades, but the main building is still sound. Come alone, at midnight. We will talk. The line went dead. Jurgen set down the phone and returned to his scope, studying the trucks that had now moved to positions that bracketed his escape routes. Diego was giving him a choice, but it was the kind of choice a chess master offers a trapped opponent: surrender now or be destroyed piece by piece. Sheriff Brennan's voice came through on his police scanner, coordinating with federal agents who were finally moving into position. Too little, too late. By the time law enforcement mobilized enough firepower to challenge Diego's forces, the situation would be over one way or another. Jurgen thought about the letter Maria had sent with Vicente, still unopened on his kitchen table. Whatever she'd written, whatever final words she'd wanted him to hear, might be the last communication between them. He'd been afraid to read it, afraid of what emotions it might unleash when he needed to stay focused. Now, with midnight approaching and a deadly meeting ahead, he broke the wax seal and unfolded the yellowed paper. Dear Jurgen, it began in careful script. By the time you read this, my son will be coming for you. I am sorry for this, sorrier than you can know. You showed me kindness when I had forgotten such things existed, and now that kindness will bring you nothing but pain. But I want you to understand something about Diego. He was not always what he has become. As a boy, he rescued wounded animals and wept over every creature he could not save. He is lost now, drowning in a world of violence and fear. But the boy I raised is still there, still fighting to breathe. If you see him when you see him, remember this. He needs saving as much as I do, perhaps more. The difference is that I know I need saving, and he has forgotten. Whatever happens, know that you gave an old woman 3 days of peace. 3 days when I remembered what it felt like to be safe, to be cared for without condition or agenda. That is a gift beyond price. With gratitude and affection, Maria. Jurgen folded the letter carefully and placed it in his shirt pocket, close to his heart. Outside, the trucks had withdrawn to a more distant position, giving him space to move freely around his property. Diego was playing this like a gentleman's war, offering respect even as he maneuvered for advantage. At 11:30, Jurgen loaded his gear into his pickup truck. The .45 rode in its shoulder holster, and he'd strapped a tactical knife to his boot. His body armor felt heavy and unfamiliar after years of civilian life, but the weight was oddly comforting, a reminder of skills that had kept him alive in darker places than these mountains. The mining camp sat in a narrow valley between two ridges, its buildings stark against the star-filled sky. The main structure was a wooden frame building with a corrugated metal roof, probably built during the 1942 when silver mining had briefly flourished in these hills. Now it stood empty and forgotten, a perfect neutral ground for a meeting between enemies. Jurgen parked his truck 50 yards from the building and walked the remaining distance on foot, his senses hyper-alert for signs of ambush. But the camp appeared empty except for a single black SUV parked behind the main building. Diego Valdez stood in the doorway, silhouetted against the warm glow of battery-powered lanterns. He was smaller than Jurgen had expected, perhaps 5'8" and lean, with the kind of physical presence that came from absolute confidence rather than size. His suit was perfectly tailored, his shoes polished to mirror brightness, a man who understood that appearance was a form of armor. "Senor Voss," Diego said as Jurgen approached. "Thank you for coming. I was not certain you would. I gave my word. Yes, I am learning that your word means something." Diego gestured toward the building's interior. "Shall we?" Inside, the old mining office had been transformed into a temporary meeting space. A folding table, 2 chairs, bottles of water, and what looked like expensive whiskey. Diego had prepared for a negotiation, not an execution. "You're not what I expected," Jurgen said, as they took their seats across from each other. "Nor are you. I expected someone more primitive." The report suggested a hermit, a man broken by war and hiding from the world. Maybe they weren't wrong. Diego poured whiskey into 2 glasses and slid one across the table. "A man who was truly broken would have handed my mother over to Ramirez without question. A man who was hiding from the world would not have researched my organization so thoroughly." So Diego knew about his intelligence gathering, probably knew about the DEA contact too. This was a test as much as a negotiation. Diego was measuring his opponent before deciding how to proceed. "Tell me about my mother," Diego said. "What was she like during those 3 days?" It was an unexpected question, delivered with genuine curiosity rather than tactical calculation. For a moment, the cartel boss disappeared and Jurgen glimpsed the sun underneath. "Grateful," Jurgen said honestly. "Frightened, but also relieved, I think. Like she'd been carrying something heavy for a long time and had finally been able to set it down." Diego's hand tightened on his whiskey glass. "She was safe with you. As safe as I could make her. Safer than she has been in years." Diego's voice carried a note of pain that surprised them both. "Do you know what it's like to love someone so much that you become the thing they fear most?" The hidden letter crackled in Maria's trembling hands as she sat in the abandoned ranger station where Vicente had brought her to hide. The paper was old, creased from being folded and refolded countless times, and the ink had faded to brown with age. But the words were still clear, still damning, still capable of destroying everything Diego had built. Outside, the wind howled through the pine trees, carrying the sound of distant engines, Diego's men, searching the mountains for any trace of her. They were close now, too close. Soon, there would be nowhere left to run. Maria looked at the letter one more time, remembering the night she'd written it 3 years ago when she'd finally decided she couldn't remain silent anymore. The night she'd realized that saving her son meant destroying him. "Forgive me, Diego," she whispered to the empty room. But someone has to remember who you used to be. She pulled out the encrypted cell phone. Vicente had given her a device that would connect her directly to the FBI field office in Albuquerque. One call would set everything in motion. One call would end the charade that had consumed the last 3 years of her life. The phone rang twice before a woman answered. "Agent Martinez, this is Maria Valdez," she said in careful English. "I believe you've been looking for me." 15 miles away, at the abandoned mining camp, Diego and Jurgen sat across from each other, in a silence that stretched like a wire under tension. The whiskey sat untouched between them, and the battery-powered lanterns cast dancing shadows on the wooden walls. "You asked what it's like to love someone so much you become what they fear," Jurgen said finally. "I think I'm starting to understand." Diego's eyes sharpened. "Meaning? Your mother didn't run from you because she stopped loving you. She ran because she loves you too much to watch you destroy yourself. You think you know her? 3 days of playing house in your mountain cabin, and you think you understand a relationship that spans 60 years? I know she cries in her sleep," Jurgen said quietly. "I know she keeps a picture of you as a boy in her wallet, not the man you've become, but the child she remembers. And I know she'd rather die than watch you become something that would have broken your father's heart." Diego's composure cracked for just a moment, long enough for Jurgen to see the pain. Underneath, raw, bleeding, carefully hidden but never healed. "My father was weak," Diego said. "His compassion got him killed. His compassion raised a son who still visits his grave every year on his birthday." The words hit their target. Diego's hand went instinctively to the gold chain around his neck, where a small key hung hidden beneath his shirt, the key to his father's mausoleum, worn smooth by years of handling. "How do you—" "Your mother told me. She said you still bring him flowers, still talk to him about the choices you've had to make. That doesn't sound like a man who thinks his father was weak." Before Diego could respond, his encrypted phone buzzed with an urgent message. He glanced at the screen and his face went white. "What is it?" Jurgen asked. Diego stared at the phone as if it had transformed into a venomous snake. "My mother just surrendered herself to the FBI." The silence that followed was broken only by the wind outside and the distant sound of vehicles moving rapidly through the mountains. Both men understood immediately what this meant. Maria hadn't just run from her son's protection. She'd been running towards something else entirely. "She planned this," Diego said, his voice hollow with realization. "The escape, the breakdown, finding you, all of it was planned." Jurgen felt the pieces clicking into place with sickening clarity. Maria's careful questions about his military service, her interest in his moral code, the way she'd seemed to be studying him during those 3 quiet days in his cabin. She was looking for someone, he said, someone with the right reputation, the right background, someone who would protect her long enough for her to complete her mission. Diego's voice was barely a whisper. "Jesus Christ, she used you. She used both of us." The phone buzzed again. Another message. This one longer. Diego read it twice before looking up at Jurgen with something approaching respect. "Agent Martinez wants to meet with me. Tonight. She says, my mother has provided evidence that could destroy my entire organization, but she's willing to negotiate if I surrender myself voluntarily. Evidence, financial records, names of corrupted officials, details about supply routes and distribution networks." Diego's laugh was bitter and broken. "Everything she would have learned from 20 years of running the legitimate side of our business." Jurgen thought about the gentle woman who'd cooked pozole in his kitchen, who'd worried over his well-being like a grandmother tending her grandchildren, the woman who'd seemed so fragile, so in need of protection. How long has she been planning this? Years, probably, ever since I started expanding the drug operations against her wishes. Diego stood and walked to the window, staring out at the darkness. She tried everything else first. Appeals to my conscience, threats to disown me, even an attempt to turn the board of directors against me. But you wouldn't listen. I couldn't listen. In this business, Showing weakness gets you killed. Gets everyone you care about killed. Diego turned back to face Jürgen. So she found another way to save me from myself. By destroying everything you've built. By forcing me to choose between my empire and my freedom. Between the life I've made and the life she wanted for me. Another message arrived, and Diego's expression darkened as he read it. Santos and his people are moving to intercept the federal transport. They know about the evidence now, and they know she's the only witness who can authenticate it. Jürgen felt his blood turn to ice. They'll kill her. Yes, and they'll make it look like I ordered it, eliminating both the evidence and my credibility with other families. Diego pocketed his phone and checked the pistol beneath his jacket. Santos has been planning this coup for months. My mother just gave him the perfect opportunity. Then we stop them. We? Diego studied Jürgen's face in the lantern light. You realize what you're suggesting? If we work together, you become complicit in everything I've done. Everyone I've killed. Every law I've broken. I'm already complicit, Jürgen said. The moment I chose to help your mother, I became part of this story. The only question now is how it ends. Outside, the sound of engines was getting closer. Multiple vehicles, moving fast, converging on their location from different directions. Santos had found them. There's something else, Diego said as they prepared to leave. The evidence my mother gave the FBI, it's not complete. She held back the most damaging information. Why? Insurance. She knew Santos would try to eliminate her once he learned about the surrender. So she kept the locations of our main distribution centers, the identities of our highest-level contacts, information that could still destroy us all. Where is it? Diego smiled for the first time, since Jürgen had met him not with humor, but with pride in his mother's cunning. Hidden somewhere only she knows, somewhere she felt safe. Understanding hit Jürgen like a physical blow. My cabin. Your cabin. During those 3 days when she was supposedly recovering from her ordeal, she was actually hiding evidence that could bring down half the criminal organizations between Mexico City and Los Angeles. The sound of vehicles was very close now. Through the window, Jürgen could see headlights moving through the trees, surrounding the mining camp with military precision. Santos? He asked. Santos, Diego confirmed, and he's not here to negotiate. They moved toward the back exit of the building as the first shots rang out, shattering the front windows and sending splinters of wood flying through the air. Santos's men were done with subtlety. This was going to be a war. Your truck or mine? Jürgen asked, as they crouched behind an overturned table. Neither. They'll have both covered by now. Diego pulled out his phone and sent a rapid text message. I have people in these mountains too, but we need to reach your cabin before Santos figures out what my mother really left there. And then? Then we pray she was as clever as I think she was, Diego replied. Because if that evidence falls into the wrong hands, a lot of innocent people are going to die. As they slipped out the back of the building and into the darkness of the pine forest, Jürgen found himself thinking about Maria's letter, still folded in his shirt pocket. She'd written about saving her son, about remembering the boy he used to be. Now, running through the mountains beside the man who'd become Mexico's most feared criminal, Jürgen wondered if Maria's desperate gamble might actually work. If forcing Diego to choose between his empire and his conscience might finally break through the walls he'd built around his heart. Behind them, the mining camp erupted in gunfire as Santos's men discovered they were gone. Ahead lay Jürgen's cabin, and whatever secrets Maria had hidden there during her 3 days of supposed recovery. And somewhere between the two, a mother's love was about to face its ultimate test. The flash drive was no bigger than Jürgen's thumb, but as Maria held it up to the fluorescent lights of the FBI safe house, it seemed to contain the weight of the world. 20 years of carefully documented evidence, financial transactions, communication records, photographs of meetings that were never supposed to have witnesses. Everything needed to dismantle not just Diego's organization, but the entire network of corruption that had allowed it to flourish. This represents over 300 criminal indictments, Agent Martinez said, her voice tight with anticipation. Judges, prosecutors, police chiefs, border officials, your son's empire was only possible because of systemic corruption at every level. Maria set the drive down on the metal, a table between them, her fingers trembling slightly. Through the reinforced windows of the safe house, she could see federal agents positioning themselves around the perimeter. But she knew it wouldn't be enough. When Santos came, and he would bring an army. "There's more," she said quietly. "Information I didn't include in the surrender." Martinez leaned forward. "What kind of information?" "The kind that could start a war between the families, or end one." Maria pulled a second flash drive from the lining of her jacket. Distribution routes that cross through territories controlled by 3 different cartels. Financial arrangements that would collapse if exposed. Enough evidence to tear apart the entire power structure. "Why didn't you include this before?" "Because I needed insurance. For myself. For my son." Maria's voice grew stronger, more resolute. "And for the man who risked everything to protect me." 10 miles away, Jurgen and Diego moved through the mountain forest like ghosts, using every piece of cover the terrain provided. Behind them, Santos's men were spreading out in a coordinated search pattern, their vehicles forming a tightening net around the area. "Your mother's smarter than either of us gave her credit for," Jurgen said as they paused behind a cluster of granite boulders. "She played us both perfectly." "She always was the strategist in the family," Diego replied, checking his phone for messages from his own security teams. "My father had the vision, I have the execution skills, but she could see 3 moves ahead of everyone else. Which means she anticipated this moment. You and me, working together." Diego looked up from his phone, studying Jurgen's face in the moonlight. "You think this was all planned? Even Santos's betrayal? I think your mother loves you enough to orchestrate your redemption, even if it destroys everything you've built." Jurgen adjusted his grip on the rifle he'd taken from his Tassaun, the cabin before they fled. "The question is whether you're ready to be redeemed." Before Diego could answer, his phone buzzed with an encrypted message. His face went white as he read it. "What is it?" "Santos has taken 3 hostages from the FBI safe house. Demands an exchange, the complete evidence files for their lives." "Who?" "Agent Martinez. 2 federal marshals." Diego's voice was steady, but Jurgen could see the tension in his jaw. "And my mother." The words hung between them like a death sentence. Santos had outmaneuvered the federal agents with embarrassing ease, turning their protective custody into a trap. Now he had exactly what he needed to destroy both the evidence and any witnesses who could authenticate it. "He's forcing your hand," Jurgen said. "Come to him and he kills you all. Stay away, and he kills them anyway, then blames you for their deaths. Unless we give him what he wants. The complete files, that would destroy you just as thoroughly as Santos. It would." Diego was quiet for a long moment, thinking through options that all led to disaster. "There's a third choice. We get to my mother before Santos can move her to a more secure location." "Where is he holding them?" "The old Border Patrol station on Highway 9. Abandoned since 2018, but the building is defensible, and it's only 20 minutes from the border." Diego showed Jurgen the tactical photos on his phone. "Santos will expect me to come alone, to try to negotiate. He won't expect a coordinated assault. You have people you can trust?" 6 men, maybe 8. All former military, all loyal to my family rather than the organization. Diego's smile was grim. "Santos has been recruiting my soldiers for months, but he never understood the difference between fear and loyalty." Jurgen studied the photos, his tactical mind automatically analyzing fields of fire, approach routes, and potential complications. The Border Patrol station was a concrete and steel fortress designed to withstand anything smugglers could throw at it. Taking it would require either overwhelming force or surgical precision. "How long do we have?" Santos wants an answer by dawn. That gives us maybe 4 hours to plan and execute. Then we better get moving. They made their way back toward Jurgen's cabin, using paths that Diego's men had scouted earlier. The property looked different now. What had once been a peaceful mountain retreat had been transformed into a staging area for war. Vehicles hidden in the tree line, weapons caches positioned at strategic points, communication equipment that would let them coordinate with federal forces when the time came. Diego's lieutenant, Carlos Mendoza, was waiting for them with a grim expression and a folder full of intelligence reports. "Santos has 40 men at the station," he said without preamble. "Heavy weapons, military-grade equipment. He's treating this like a siege." "Because it is a siege," Diego replied. "What about our people?" "Rafael and his team are in position to the north. Miguel has the east approach covered. But Santos has the main building locked down, tight reinforced doors, bulletproof glass, limited access points." Jurgen spread the tactical photos across his kitchen table, the same table where he'd shared quiet meals with Maria just days before. Now it was covered with maps and weapons specifications, the tools of war replacing the simple comfort of human connection. "He's made a mistake," Jurgen said, pointing to the building's layout. "Look at the ventilation system. Industrial grade, designed to handle chemical attacks from smugglers. But that means large ducts," Diego finished. "Big enough for a man to crawl through. If we can get someone inside, create a distraction from within while teams assault the main entrances." "I'll go," Diego said immediately. "No." Jurgen's voice was firm. "You're what Santos wants. If he gets his hands on you, this whole thing falls apart." "Then who?" Jurgen looked around the room at the faces of Diego's men, hardened professionals who'd followed their boss into situations that would have broken lesser soldiers. But they were also men with families, with lives that extended beyond the cartel's business. "I'll go," he said. "I'm smaller than most of your people, and I've done this kind of insertion before." "It's a suicide mission," Carlos objected. "Even if you get inside, you'll be trapped with nowhere to run. Not if we time it right." Jurgen traced the building's layout with his finger. "The distraction has to be big enough to draw Santos's attention, give me time to locate the hostages and neutralize the guards. But it also has to be precise. We can't risk hitting Maria or the federal agents." Diego studied the plans with the focused intensity of a general preparing for his most important battle. What kind of distraction? The kind that makes Santos think he's under full assault by federal forces. Helicopters, armored vehicles, the works. Jurgen looked up at Diego. "Can your people coordinate with the FBI without compromising the operation?" "Agent Martinez gave us emergency contact protocols before she was taken. If she's still alive, she'll know we're coming." The weight of those words, "if she's still alive," settled over the room like smoke. They all knew Santos's reputation. He kept hostages alive only as long as they served his purposes. "We need to move fast," Jurgen said. "Every minute we delay increases the chance that Santos decides to cut his losses." As they finalized their plans, Jurgen found himself thinking about the path that had led him to this moment. A week ago, his biggest concern had been whether his tomatoes would ripen before the first frost. Now, he was preparing to infiltrate a hostile facility to rescue the mother of Mexico's most dangerous cartel boss. But it didn't feel like a dramatic transformation. It felt like coming home. "There's something you should know," Diego said as they prepared to leave. "If this goes wrong, if Santos captures or kills me, my organization will fragment within weeks. Other families will move to claim our territory, our assets. The violence will spread, and if it goes right, I'll have to choose between the empire I've built and the mother who raised me, between power and redemption." Diego's laugh was bitter. "She planned it this way, you know. Forced me into a situation where I can't win by traditional measures." "Maybe winning isn't the point," Jurgen suggested. "Maybe the point is making the right choice, regardless of the cost. You sound like her. I'll take that as a compliment. As they loaded their gear and prepared to leave, Sheriff Brennan's voice crackled through the radio. Jurgen, we've got federal assets moving to support positions around the target. ETA 30 minutes. Copy that, Tom. Remember, nobody moves until we give the signal. Roger. And Jurgen, whatever you're planning in there, be smart about it. That woman's been through enough. The convoy pulled out of Jurgen's clearing in the pre-dawn darkness, a mix of cartel vehicles and law enforcement assets that would have been unthinkable just days before. Diego rode beside Jurgen in the lead truck, checking his weapons with the methodical precision of a professional soldier. My mother once told me that courage isn't the absence of fear, Diego said. It's doing what's right despite the fear. Sounds like something she'd say. She was talking about my father's decision to refuse protection money from rival cartels. The decision that got him killed. Diego looked out at the mountain landscape rolling past. I've spent 20 years trying to be strong enough that no one could hurt my family the way they hurt him. And instead, you became the thing your family needed protection from. Yeah. Diego's voice was barely a whisper. Yeah, I did. As they approached the border patrol station, Jurgen could see the compound's lights in the distance, a fortress of concrete and steel that had become the center of a war between love and power, between redemption and revenge. In a few hours, it would all be over. One way or another, the choices made in the next few hours would determine not just whether Maria Valdez lived or died, but whether her son could find his way back to the man she'd raised him to be. The flash drive in her pocket contained the power to destroy an empire. But the real question was whether it also contained the power to save a soul. Jurgen's combat knife felt familiar in his hand as he crouched in the ventilation shaft above the border patrol station. Its weight a reminder of battles fought in darker places than these New Mexico mountains. The blade had saved his life in Afghanistan when his rifle jammed during a Taliban assault. Now, 20 feet above where Santos held Maria captive, it represented his willingness to kill or die, protecting her, a return to the warrior he'd tried to leave behind. The shaft was barely wide enough for his shoulders, and every movement had to be calculated to avoid making noise that would alert the guards below. Through the metal grating, he could see into the main holding area, where Santos paced like a caged predator, his expensive suit incongruous in the abandoned federal facility. Maria sat in a metal chair, her hands zip-tied behind her back, but her posture remained defiant. Even as a prisoner, she carried herself with the dignity of someone who'd made peace with her choices. Agent Martinez and the 2 federal marshals were secured against the far wall, conscious but clearly roughed up during the capture. Santos checked his watch and spoke into a satellite phone. 1 hour, Diego. Then I start sending pieces of your mother back to you. The threat made Jurgen's blood run cold, but it also confirmed their timeline. Diego's assault teams were moving into position outside, coordinating with federal forces that had finally mobilized enough firepower to challenge Santos's mercenaries. The plan was surgical: create enough chaos to divide Santos's attention, while Jurgen eliminated the immediate threat to the hostages. A burst of automatic gunfire erupted from the compound's perimeter, followed by the distinctive whump of smoke grenades. Diego's people had started their diversionary attack right on schedule, drawing Santos's men toward the reinforced windows and defensive positions. "Cabrones," Santos snarled, gesturing to his lieutenant. "Take half the men and reinforce the north wall. These federales think they can intimidate us with their toys." But as his soldiers moved to respond to the external threat, Santos himself remained focused on his primary assets, the hostages who represented his only leverage against both Diego and the federal government. He pulled out a pistol and checked its load with the casual efficiency of a man comfortable with violence. Jurgen used the noise of the gunfight to mask his movement as he positioned himself directly above Santos. The ventilation grating was secured with 4 screws, already loosened during his crawl through the system. One quick motion would drop him into the room, but he'd have perhaps 3 seconds before Santos could react. Through his earpiece, Diego's voice crackled with static and tension. "Insertion team, report status." "In position," Jurgen whispered. "Beginning final approach. Copy. Federal teams are moving to support positions. You have maybe 10 minutes before this place becomes a war zone." Maria looked up suddenly, as if sensing his presence above her. For just a moment, their eyes met through the metal slats, and he saw recognition flicker across her face. She gave the slightest nod, then deliberately shifted her position to give him a clearer angle of attack. Even as a captive, she was still protecting him. Santos was shouting orders into his radio, coordinating defensive positions as Diego's assault intensified. More gunfire, closer now, as the attacking teams pressed their advantage. The smell of cordite and smoke began filtering through the compound's ventilation system. "Sir," one of Santos's remaining guards called out. "They're using flash bangs on the east entrance." "Heavy resistance. Let them come," Santos replied, raising his pistol toward Maria. "Diego wants to play soldier. He can watch his mother pay the price." Jurgen didn't hesitate. The grating fell away as he dropped through the ceiling, the combat knife already in motion as his boots hit the concrete floor. Santos spun toward the sound, but military training and 3 tours in Afghanistan had honed Jurgen's reflexes to a razor's edge. The knife took Santos in the shoulder, spinning him away from Maria and sending his pistol clattering across the floor. The cartel lieutenant moved to assist his boss, but Jurgen was already rolling, coming up, with Santos's dropped weapon in his hand. "Federal agent," he shouted, though it wasn't technically true. "Everyone on the ground, now!" Santos clutched his bleeding shoulder, his face twisted with pain and rage. "You're making a mistake, soldado. Kill me, and my men will tear this place apart." "Your men are busy," Jurgen replied, keeping the pistol trained on Santos while moving to cut Maria's restraints. "And you're not as important as you think you are." But even wounded, Santos wasn't finished. As Jurgen freed Maria's hands, the cartel boss lunged for a backup weapon concealed beneath his jacket. Maria saw the movement first and threw herself between Santos and Jurgen, taking a bullet meant for the man who'd risked everything to save her. "Mama." Diego's voice echoed through the compound as he and his assault team breached the main entrance, their tactical gear and weapons making them look like the elite soldiers they'd once been. Santos raised his gun toward the new threat, but Diego was faster. 2 precise shots sent en masse, delivered with the cold efficiency of a man who'd been killing his enemies since he was 16 years old. The cartel lieutenant tried to flee but ran directly into Agent Martinez, who'd freed herself during the chaos and was waiting with handcuffs and a very unsympathetic expression. As the gunfire outside began to fade, Diego dropped to his knees beside his mother, his hands shaking as he tried to assess her wound. The bullet had caught her in the side, missing vital organs but causing significant blood loss. "I'm sorry," she whispered, her voice weak but clear. "I had to." "Shh," Diego said, his voice breaking. "You did what you had to do, just like you taught me." Federal agents poured into the compound, securing the scene and providing medical attention to the wounded. But for a moment, in the aftermath of violence, mother and son were alone in their reconciliation. Jurgen stood guard over them both, the combat knife still in his hand, ready to defend the family he'd chosen to protect. Outside, the New Mexico sun was beginning to rise over the mountains, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson. The war was over, but the real battle for Diego's soul was just beginning. Maria's rosary beads clicked softly in her trembling hands as she lay on the stretcher, each worn bead a prayer whispered in the growing light of dawn. The medics had stabilized her wound, but she refused transport to the hospital until she'd spoken to her son. The beads had belonged to her own mother, passed down through 3 generations of Valdez women who'd learned that sometimes love required sacrifice. Diego knelt beside the stretcher, his expensive suit torn and blood-stained, his face a mask of conflicting emotions. Around them, federal agents processed the scene with methodical efficiency, but mother and son existed in a bubble of intimacy that 20 years of separation couldn't diminish. "You could have. I've been killed," Diego said, his voice raw with emotion. "When I saw Santos raise that gun, but I wasn't," Maria replied, her fingers working the familiar pattern of prayers. "And neither were you. Sometimes that's the best we can hope for." Agent Martinez approached cautiously, holding the flash drives that contained the evidence against Diego's organization. Her expression was professional, but Jürgen could see the human conflict in her eyes. She was about to destroy a family that had just found each other again. "Mrs. Valdez," she said gently, "we need to discuss the terms of the plea agreement." "No." Diego stood slowly, his hand moving to his mother's shoulder. "There won't be a plea agreement." Martinez frowned. "Mr. Valdez, with respect, you don't have a choice. The evidence your mother provided is incomplete," Diego finished. "The financial records, the communication logs, the photographs, they're all accurate. But they don't tell the whole story." He pulled out his own phone and scrolled through encrypted files, showing them to Martinez and Jürgen. "For the past 3 years, since my mother first approached the FBI, I've been documenting everything. Every transaction, every meeting, every order I gave. But I've also been documenting something else." "What?" Martinez asked. "The people I've been protecting, the communities where we operate, the children who eat because we provide their fathers with work, the schools and hospitals we've funded when the government wouldn't." Diego's voice grew stronger, more confident. "My organization isn't just about drugs, Agent Martinez. It's about survival for thousands of people who have nowhere else to turn." Jürgen watched the interplay between federal agent and cartel boss. Seeing something he hadn't expected, Diego wasn't just defending his empire. He was defending his people. "That doesn't excuse the violence," Martinez said. "The murders, the corruption. No. It doesn't." Diego looked down at his mother, who was watching him with fierce pride. "But it explains why simply destroying everything I've built isn't justice. It's just revenge." Maria struggled to sit up, ignoring the medic's protests. "Tell her about the proposal," she said to her son. "What proposal?" Martinez asked. Diego took a deep breath, and Jürgen realized this moment had been planned, not the violence, not Santos's betrayal, but this conversation. Mother and son working together toward a resolution neither could have achieved alone. "Full cooperation with federal authorities," Diego said. "Complete disclosure of all operations, all assets, all personnel. But instead of dismantling the organization, we transform it. Legal businesses, legitimate employment, a pathway out of the drug trade for everyone who wants it." "And you?" Martinez asked. "What happens to you in this scenario?" "Prison," Diego said simply. "However many years the law requires. But supervised transition of leadership to people who will honor the commitment to go legitimate." The silence that followed was broken only by the distant sound of helicopters, bringing additional federal support. Jürgen found himself thinking about second chances, about the possibility that redemption might look different than punishment. "Your mother risked everything to give you this choice," he said to Diego. "Are you really ready to take it?" Diego looked around the compound, where Santos's body still lay covered by a tarp, where blood stained the concrete floors, where violence had been answered with more violence. Then he looked at his mother, clutching her rosary beads and watching him with eyes full of love and hope. "I'm tired," he said finally. "Tired of being afraid. Tired of hurting people to protect other people. Tired of disappointing the woman who raised me to be better than I became." He knelt again beside Maria's stretcher and took her free hand in both of his. "I can't undo the things I've done. I can't bring back the people who died because of my choices. But maybe I can make sure their deaths weren't meaningless." Maria's eyes filled with tears, but her voice was steady. Your father would be proud of you. You think so? I know so. The boy I raised is still there, Mijo. He just got lost for a while. Agent Martinez cleared her throat. If you're serious about this proposal, we'll need to involve federal prosecutors, the Justice Department, possibly international authorities. I understand. And there are no guarantees. The court will determine your sentence based on the full scope of your crimes. I understand that too. As the medical team finally insisted on transporting Maria to the hospital, she handed her rosary beads to Diego. "Keep these," she said. "They'll remind you that every prayer is a hope for something better." Diego closed his fingers around the worn beads, feeling the weight of generations of faith and love. Around him, federal agents continued their work, but he barely noticed. For the first time in 20 years, he felt something he'd almost forgotten: peace. Jurgen watched the ambulance disappear down the mountain road, carrying a woman whose courage had changed everything. Then he looked at Diego, who stood holding his mother's rosary and staring at the sunrise with the expression of a man seeing the world clearly for the first time. "What happens now?" Jurgen asked. Diego smiled, a real smile, not the calculated expression he wore for business. "Now I try to become the man she always believed I could be." The new garden plot stretched along the southern edge of Jurgen's property, where the morning sun would warm the soil and encourage growth. 6 months had passed since the confrontation at the border patrol station, and where once there had been tactical positions and weapons caches, now there were neat rows of marigolds and roses, their bright colors a stark contrast to the memories of violence that had scarred this place. Maria knelt beside him in the soft earth, her movements careful but determined. The bullet wound had healed well, leaving only a small scar that she wore like a badge of honor. Her hands, weathered by decades of work and worry, moved with practiced grace as she planted bulbs that would bloom in the spring. "Tulips," she said, holding up a brown bulb that looked like nothing special. "In my grandmother's village in Sonora, we believed they represented new beginnings, perfect love that could survive any winter." Jurgen accepted the bulb and placed it carefully in the hole he'd prepared. "Think they'll grow this high up? They'll grow wherever they're planted with love and tended with patience." Maria's smile carried the wisdom of someone who'd learned that growth required both time and faith. Gardens teach us that beauty can bloom from the darkest soil. They worked in comfortable silence, the kind that comes between people who've shared extraordinary circumstances and emerged as family. Around them, the mountain wilderness continued its ancient rhythms, indifferent to human struggles but somehow sanctified by the peace that had finally settled over this place. A car door slammed in the distance, and they looked up to see Sheriff Brennan walking toward them, followed by a smaller figure that made Maria's face light up with joy. Diego's 8-year-old daughter, Isabella, ran ahead of the sheriff, her dark hair streaming behind her as she raced to embrace her grandmother. "Abuela!" she cried, throwing her arms around Maria with the unreserved affection of childhood. "Papa said to tell you the judge was very nice today. Was he now?" Maria held her granddaughter close, breathing in the scent of innocence and hope. "And what did this nice judge say?" "He said Papa was very brave for telling the truth, and that 15 years isn't so long when you're doing good things." Isabella pulled back to look at her grandmother with serious eyes. "Papa also said to tell you he's proud to be your son." The words hit Maria like a physical blow, bringing tears she quickly wiped away. Diego's sentencing had been front-page news across the Southwest. The cartel boss, who'd cooperated with federal authorities to transform his criminal empire into legitimate businesses. 15 years in federal prison, with the possibility of supervised release in 10 for continued cooperation and community service. "He's changed, you know," Sheriff Brennan said, settling into one of the wooden chairs Jurgen had built for the garden. "The federal marshals say he spends most of his time in the prison library, working on his college degree. Business administration, if you can believe that." "I can believe it," Maria said. "He was always brilliant. He just forgot for a while that intelligence without compassion is just clever cruelty. Isabella had discovered the tulip bulbs and was examining them with the intense curiosity of a child encountering something new. "What are these, abuela?" "Promises," Maria replied. "Promises that spring will come, no matter how cold the winter gets." As afternoon faded into evening, they shared a simple meal on the porch pozole made from Maria's grandmother's recipe, warm bread from the bakery in town, and stories that wove together past and present into something resembling hope. Isabella chatted about school and friends and the letters her father sent from prison, each one carefully crafted to nurture her childhood while acknowledging the reality of his absence. "Will you stay with Uncle Jurgen forever?" Isabella asked her grandmother as they watched the sunset paint the mountains in shades of gold and crimson. As long as he'll have me," Maria replied, glancing at Jurgen with affection that had deepened over months of shared domestic routines and quiet companionship. "Forever, then," Jurgen said simply, and meant it. After Brennan and Isabella had gone, Maria and Jurgen remained on the porch, watching stars emerge in the clear mountain sky. The silence between them was comfortable, filled with the sounds of a world at peace wind through pine trees, the distant call of an owl, the rustle of small creatures moving through the underbrush. "Do you ever regret it?" Maria asked. "The choice you made to help me, everything that followed?" Jurgen considered the question seriously, thinking about the quiet life he'd built and nearly lost, the violence that had invaded his sanctuary, the federal scrutiny that had followed him for months. But he also thought about the woman beside him, whose courage had redeemed not just her son, but everyone touched by their story. "Regret isn't the right word," he said finally. "I lost my isolation, but I gained something I didn't know I was missing." "What's that?" "Purpose, connection, the feeling that my choices matter to someone other than myself." He looked at her in the starlight, seeing the strength that had carried her through 20 years of loving a son who'd lost his way. "You gave me back my life, Maria. The real one, not just the imitation I was hiding behind." A month later, a knock at the door brought unexpected news. Agent Martinez stood on the porch, but her expression was friendly rather than official. Behind her, a young man in his 20s waited nervously, carrying a bouquet of wildflowers. "Mrs. Valdez," Martinez said, "I'd like you to meet Jorge Santos Miguel's nephew. He wanted to thank you personally." The young man stepped forward, his eyes filled with shame and gratitude. "Senora, because of what you and your son did, because of the way you transformed my uncle's organization, my family was able to leave that life. I'm in college now, studying engineering. Clean money, clean future." Maria accepted the flowers with grace, but Jurgen could see the tears threatening to spill. "What happened to your uncle? I'm sorry for that loss." "He made his choices," Jorge replied. "But you and Diego, you made it possible for the rest of us to make different ones." After they left, Maria stood in her garden holding the wildflowers, surrounded by the new growth they'd planted together. The tulip bulbs were still underground, waiting for spring, but already green shoots from other plantings were pushing through the soil. "You know what I learned?" she said to Jurgen as they surveyed their work. "What's that? Sometimes the greatest act of love is letting go, not of the person, but of who you need them to be." I had to stop trying to save Diego and start trusting him to save himself. Jurgen nodded, thinking about his own journey from isolation to connection, from hiding to engagement with life. And sometimes the greatest act of courage is accepting help from a stranger. "Are we still strangers?" Maria asked, smiling. "No," Jurgen replied, looking around at the home they'd built together from the ashes of violence and fear. "I think we're family now." As if summoned by their words, a battered pickup truck appeared on the access road, the same truck that had brought Vicente with Maria's letter so many months ago. But this time, the elderly man wasn't alone. A woman sat beside him, and children's voices could be heard from the truck bed. More family. Maria said, and went to greet the new arrivals with the warmth of someone who'd learned that home isn't a place, but a choice. The choice to love without condition, to protect without possessing, and to plant seeds of hope even in the darkest soil. The garden would bloom in spring, just as Maria had promised. But the real growth had already happened in hearts that had learned to trust, in lives that had found purpose, and in a love strong enough to survive any winter.